Okay, so I had a question on kind of some chapter 7 stuff that I want to talk about. Accounting cost versus economic cost. What's the diff? So, what is the difference between accounting costs, the costs that accountants take into consideration, versus what economists take into consideration? Which one's bigger? Which one has more costs? The economist version or the accounting version? The economist version, right? Because we're adding on implicit cost as well as explicit cost. So that was the first thing, first step in it. The thing I didn't spend too much time on was the idea of depreciation. That is, there's a kind of an economic definition and an accounting definition. And the accounting definition follows IRS. What does IRS stand for? Internal Revenue Service. Yeah, the tax collector. So some of you might have seen this in your, how many of you are in the intro accounting classes right now? So you've seen a few hands go up? Okay. So you've done the depreciation expense. So if you have a $10,000 grill, remember our restaurant had a $10,000 grill? The IRS might allow you to claim as an expense that grill over the next 5 years. And so it's called straight line depreciation. And so 10,000 divided by 5 equals 2,000 bucks. You get to claim a $2,000 expense on your profits. So if we look at profits equal total revenue minus total cost, the IRS is going to allow you to subtract off this kind of fake expense in a way. So it makes your expenses a little bit bigger, lowers your taxable profit. So that's the kind of the game. I don't know if it's the right word, but we get into the political realm with how much the tax rates are, how do we calculate it. All somewhat non-economic. So what really is going on is that you're going to own that grill possibly for 10 years, right? Some restaurants have grills that are probably 20, 30 years old. So just because the IRS allows you to claim as an expense the $2,000 doesn't necessarily reflect the economics of that grill on what's relevant for the business owner. So this is accounting depreciation. So accounting depreciation, which again would be /IRS depreciation, would be this. And this is sometimes, or this would be referred to as straight line depreciation. All right, so let's contrast that with economic depreciation. So if your $10,000 grill, next year, you bought it brand new, and you know how if you go to sell that grill on eBay or Craigslist, what's likely to have happened to its market value, even if it's just 1 year old?
Gone down.
It's gone down, possibly a lot, right? I mean, if you're going to dump that grill on eBay or Craigslist or whatever, and it's used, maybe, and I'm just making up numbers here, but maybe the market value, 1 year from now, you can sell for $6,000. That is economic depreciation, because now what we're looking at is what's the opportunity cost of holding on to the grill. I could sell it for $6,000. I purchased it before for $10,000. Now I've lost $4,000 worth of value, but we're looking at market values. And what's kind of interesting here is that possibly after the first year you take a big hit, but maybe the used value holds itself pretty well. And so maybe the second year it goes from $6,000 to, again, I'm just making up numbers, but maybe it's only $5,500. And so now we've only got $500 worth of kind of lost value over the course of the year. So this captures the implicit cost that's going on. I'm holding on to that grill. I'm choosing to hold on to the grill for another year, and it has an implicit cost of I'm losing $500 over the course of that time. Hopefully I'm making much more money being able to flip my hamburgers, but at least I'm capturing the lost opportunities of holding on to the grill. Okay? So we don't see this one, I don't even usually cover this too closely, but since the question was raised, I thought this would be another insight into implicit cost versus explicit cost, because at the end of the day, you still just have the grill. And just because the IRS allowed us to say it's 2,000 depreciation doesn't necessarily mean squat for your business, other than the reduction of tax liability, which is important. Okay? Questions or comments on that? All right, so we left off on Wednesday looking at, maybe I'll just leave that here. Where am I at on my gizmo? Oops. I go here. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go here. And voila, fresh. I really miss my tracking device. You guys don't even, well, I don't know if you remember, but this thing kind of follows me around. It's nice and easy. I don't have to worry about it. It's got this, it's got this squeal. It's picking up something in this room. There's a conflicting with the radio frequency. You can't hear it at all, but when I play the recording back, there's this high-pitched, irritating sound that's really not tolerable to watch back with. So, and our IT department hasn't been able to get me an answer, so we make do. All right, so what did we leave off with last time? We were doing some graphs, maybe? Yeah. So we had developed a relationship between total variable costs and total fixed costs. Remember, we went through and we brainstormed all of the cost of a grocery store, and we identified things that vary with the output, the number of product going out the door, and things that do not. So insurance didn't change. Rent for the building didn't change. It doesn't matter if you're kicking out 1,000 units that day or 10,000 units that day. You're paying the same amount of rent. So all we did is we now partitioned total cost into two sections. One that varies with quantity and one that does not. So an important concept that we're going to touch on shortly is that if quantity equals 0 for the day, what does total cost equal? What's that? Fixed cost. Right. So if I choose to be closed on Sundays in reverence for the Lord Jesus Christ, then I still have to pay my rent that day. I still have to pay my insurance bill. I still have to pay this. I still have to pay that. So if quantity equals 0, then total cost equals total fixed cost. You still have some payments to make. Okay. So I wanted to start off today looking at the granddaddy of them all, marginal cost. Now, we defined and kind of showed marginal cost way back in chapter 2 or 3, I can't remember, one of those where we had marginal benefit, marginal cost. So here I want to tighten that up as it relates to the company. And so marginal cost is the change in total cost, the change in total cost from an additional unit of production. So if I just squeeze out one more marker, if I'm in the marker production business, what does one more marker today cost me? What's the cost of an additional unit? So the change in total cost from an additional unit of production. Putting our equation goggles on, it is the change in total cost divided by the change in quantity. So I'm using the little shorthand notation with the triangle, a little delta, change in total cost over the change in quantity. We'll go through an example later. Hopefully that'll start to come together. But if we go back to what could actually change, if I'm producing 100 units and I'm thinking about producing 101 units, what are the types of costs that will change? Variable or fixed? Variable. It's the only possibility, right? Because we just got done saying fixed costs don't change. So if I change costs, the only way they could change is with my variable cost changing. So it's also equivalent to think about the change in total variable cost from a change in quantity. So that's a couple different ways to think about marginal cost. All right, so I'm going to rewrite what we did last time so that you've got all the formulas in one spot that you really need to have memorized for the next test and moving forward. So working from above here, total cost, I'm just rewriting this, equals total variable cost plus total fixed cost. It's sometimes helpful to look at the average cost per unit. What did we do to total cost if we were interested in finding the average total cost? Divided by the quantity. So if I've got 100 grand worth of total cost and I'm making 33,000 units, I take 100 grand divided by 33,000 and that'll give me the cost per unit, right? So thinking with our equation goggles, I'm simply taking the total cost and dividing it by the total amount I produced, Q. What I do to one side of the equal sign, I got to do to the other. And we derived the relationship between the averages as well. And we learned that the average total cost is equal to the sum of average variable cost and average fixed cost. So, both of these boxes contain almost all of the formulas that you need to know for Chapter 11. So these are real important. Get these down, know them, love them, memorize them. Key stuff. All right. Yes?
For the final, could you give us like an equation sheet?
I'm kind of building your equation sheet as we go. So I don't allow you to have equation sheets, but I encourage you to build your own equation sheet. Yes? Okay, so when I say this, that goes on your equation sheet. You can turn to the back of your notebook or something and start building one on. Okay? All right, so graph. We did the graph already of the average fixed costs, and I want to kind of leverage some of that information today as we draw the average variable and the average total. There. All right. Okay, so here's how they look. This time I'm just going to give it to you and then we're going to explain it backwards. So the average total cost curve is kind of a bowl-shaped looking curve. So go ahead and just draw a bowl-shaped looking curve. And I want you to put a big fat dot at the minimum point of that curve. So where it gets its lowest point ends up being a critical point. And that probably kind of makes sense to even now if we think about, I'll write that there. If we think about minimizing our average cost is minimized right there. So businesses like to minimize costs sometimes. They really like to maximize profit, by the way, not just minimize costs. So we've got to think about both things here shortly, where we're going. The average variable cost is a little bit different. It's kind of similar looking. And there's a relationship with it and average fixed. What do we know about the average variable and average fixed? If I was to pick a point here at 100 units. Not at the minimum. I could learn what the average total cost of producing 100 units is by going up to the average total cost curve, hang a left, and read off that number, whatever that number is. If it's 10, it's $10 per unit. All right, if I learned that the average variable cost was $6, how much is the average fixed? 4, because of this. The sum of the two have to equal the average total. Now, this is the first time I've ever presented it this way in 20 years. I'm hoping that it'll be an eye-opener for you. But maybe it won't. Maybe it'll fail and we'll crash and burn miserably. But what I wanted to do is get you in the habit of going up and to the left before I even drew the curve up there. So this represents the average variable cost of production, which means this vertical distance here represents the $4 of average fixed cost, right? 6 plus 4 is 10. So there was $4 of average fixed cost. There was $6. I'll put the blue line here. This vertical height is $6 of average variable cost. Yes?
I mean, this is just a theory for the graphic efficiency, but wouldn't it be better to put the fixed cost on the bottom so that way you could just have a steady line to shoot your variable cost off of?
You could do it that way, but it doesn't, we end up using the average variable cost curve down the road for another reason.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is actually eliminate drawing the average fixed cost because it's going to be repetitive.
Gotcha.
That's right. So that represents the average fixed cost. That's the average variable. So let's draw in now the average variable cost. And it's going to be a bowl-shaped look. Watch how I draw this first before you do it. I want you to come down, and as you start to come up this way, you need to close in on the average total. So go ahead and give your best shot at drawing it. I should have told you to draw this one big on your paper. I mean, you can do it small, but you might have to get your microscope out eventually. Why is that distance, that vertical distance, narrowing?
Because of
Nope, not marginal benefit. Caleb?
Because your average base cost gets smaller as
You're-
you produce more units.
Good, good. Look back on your paper from the notes from last time. If I was to draw the average fixed cost curve in, remember it started high and then it came down, 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 approaching the horizontal axis. Because as I produce more units, my average cost per unit of fixed cost falls. So towards the end there, we were getting to this vertical height. Well, this vertical height, if I was to draw it on here, if this was the average fixed cost, we can put a little ghost in here, that is this height at this quantity. So we don't really need to draw it again. We have the data up here. That vertical distance is always the average fixed cost. So we tend not to draw this one because it's already up there. We don't need more work than we already have on our plates. Okay, this curve, if you drew it right, which there's a possibility you didn't draw it right, I didn't warn you maybe enough ahead of time. Wherever this one bottoms out, it should be to the left of where that one bottomed out. So hopefully that worked on your graph. If it didn't, then try to fudge a little bit. So this now represents the minimum point of the average variable cost curve. Wherever it is on your paper. By the way, if it ended up being right where you were here, that's fine. It doesn't matter where it is. Wherever it is, it's more important to make sure you grab onto the minimum point wherever that fell. As long as it's to the left of this quantity, you're okay. All right, so questions so far? I'm going to redraw now to get rid of this clutter. Basically the same thing, so you can have another practice at it. Draw a bowl-shaped average total cost curve, a bowl-shaped average variable that kind of swoops in vertically. I like to just draw both of them without worrying about the minimum, and it usually works out just fine. Put a big fat dot at the minimum points. And now we draw the marginal cost curve. The marginal cost curve is J-shaped and swoops up, cutting through those minimum points. Just like that. All right. Why does it do that? I want you to think to your grade point average. I guess some of you are first semester freshmen, you don't have this, but let's just say that you are 2 years into your program now, and you had a 3.0 your cumulative GPA is 3.0, and here we are in the fall semester, and let's fast forward in time a little bit, and you started meeting some new friends, starting going out a little bit more, socializing, and you ended up with a 2.5 that semester. So your overall for 2 years was a 3.0, but you got a 2.5 this semester. Is your overall average going to go up or down or stay the same?
Go down.
Gonna go down. Is it going to go down to 2.5?
No.
No, right? Because we got 2 years worth of grades that are supporting the 3.0, but it is going to come down a little bit. The marginal grade is below the average. Your semester grade is below the average, so it's going to pull down the average. So let's say it pulls it down to 2.9. Your parents gave you a little bit of heck. You decided you need to buckle down. One less party per week, and you managed to pull up your GPA to a 2.9. Does your overall GPA increase, decrease, or stay the same? Stay the same. 2 years worth of grades at a 2.9. Your 2.9 is better than the 2.5 you did before, so you're trending the right direction, but it's not going to influence your overall. It's going to cut right through the minimum. So your average is now a 2.9. Your semester grade was a 2.9, so it stays the same. Then finally, all systems go, you're buckling down, you realize that you'd like to get a job when you get out and be kind of a superstar. The next semester you get a 4.0.
Oh, wow.
Is your overall GPA going to jump to a 4.0? Of course not, but it is going to go up. So the next semester when you get a 4.0, it's going to pull up your 2.9 some amount, but not all the way up to 4.0. So difference between marginal grades and your overall average. Same thing's going on here with production. So in this case, we might be talking about hamburgers, and if the cost of an additional hamburger is less than what the average of all of them were, then you're going to start to pull down the average. If they're equal, they're equal. And finally, if production gets this high, the cost of an additional burger might be $5. Your average cost of 1,000 burgers is $4.50. So that's not going to cause your average to go up to 5, but it is going to cause it to go up. So that's the relationship of costs with the company. All right. Questions or comments there? All right, I think it's time to jump into an example to tie this together. our first piece of the puzzle is to closely analyze the productivity of our resources in the production process. So we're going to get away from dollars for a moment and think about engineering. I'm guessing most of you aren't into engineering, otherwise you'd probably need to be at a different school since we don't have an engineering program. But we can think about what engineers do. What's your description, what's your gut feeling of what an engineer does? What does an engineer do?
They make life more efficient.
Okay, how?
It depends on what type of engineering you're doing.
Okay.
Designing new technology.
Designing new technologies, right? Figuring out how to make things more efficiently. So they deal with the production process. They might make a blueprint of how to make something. So, I want to think about a production function. The production function is kind of an engineering concept. And basically we've got inputs, resources, that get transformed into hamburgers, into output. And so in general, we could think of some formula that would describe the production process. And so the number of hamburgers, the quantity, is some function of labor and capital. This is a generic representation of a formula. We don't have the guts of the formula, we're just kind of showing the concept here. And what we're saying is that hamburgers, or output, is a function of our resources, labor and capital. If we were to graph that relationship by now putting labor on the horizontal axis and hamburgers on the vertical axis, you know, what would this thing look like? Would it look more like some function that looks like A, B, or C? So we got labor on the horizontal axis, we got hamburgers on the vertical axis. What would that function technically look like? A? Back of the room, A? Look good? So it's an increasing function, right? More people, more hamburgers. Higher people, you get more hamburgers. So yes, A is the winner. So we've got an increasing function. Now let's put a little more detail on that function. To the right of it, would it tend to look like A, B, or C? What would be your hunch? All of these are increasing functions, but you can see the relationship, right? As we get more labor, we get more and more output. As we get more labor, we get equal amounts of output. 10 people, 10 hamburgers, 10, you know. And here, we get decreasing amounts. More labor causes us to have more hamburgers, but at this decreasing rate. A, B, or C?
C.
C. Why?
Because we can only produce so many hamburgers with our resources, no matter how many people we have.
Okay, Mallory?
Law of diminishing returns.
Law of diminishing returns. Ooh, throwing out the fancy stuff. What does that mean? Now I'm going to, since you brought out the real term, let's see if you can really define it here.
It means as the more labor you have, then the amount of units per person that's produced becomes less and less at an increasing rate.
Okay, pretty good. The thing that you missed was that we need at least one other factor of production fixed. So in our production process, we won't necessarily get this look unless something else is fixed. So if we're talking hamburgers and a grill, maybe the size of my grill is fixed. So it's going to look something like C. So I used to cook in a restaurant. It was one of my first jobs working through school. And so let's say this is my grill top, this little island. And I can produce 100 hamburgers working by myself. So 100 per day, 100 per hour, it doesn't really matter. Okay? So I'm a cook and I can make 100 hamburgers. If I add a second person on to the production process, is our production of hamburgers likely to be 200, greater than 200, or less than 200?
Less.
Probably greater? Less?
Less than.
space on the grill.
Rachel's saying there's still a lot of space on the grill.
So maybe
Well, it
you could
depends
do
on how many
200,
that person can
assuming you
produce.
both work the same rate.
Let's say that we're identical people, just because this is econ class and we can assume stuff like that. So we are equally skilled people. If I add an equally skilled person, are we going to kick out 200, greater than 200, or less than 200, given the fact that I can do 100 all by myself?
Does that person
2?
have?
How many people say 2?
Well,
Make
does
sense?
Big enough to
Does that
accommodate
person
two
have the
people
same
and
amount
still
of
not have
resources
Okay.
you have?
What's that?
Does that person have the same amount of resources you have?
Yes, except for the grill top is fixed. That's our only fixed
Is that
resource.
whole thing the grill top?
Yep.
Does it take
You're getting real scientific here, aren't
Does it
you?
take you the whole grill top to make your 100?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's just say it doesn't.
200. 200.
Yeah, how much,
Does anybody... Go ahead, Sawyer.
how much of the grill do you take up though?
About this much.
Oh yeah, you can definitely do
200.
You can do 200, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does anybody think I could do greater than 200? Together. When I say I mean us as a team, that we could do greater than 200. You think it's possible?
Maybe work
What would
together.
make it possible, Sawyer?
Because you have a lot of grill space left over, and you have.
Not that aspect alone.
Maybe if you like work together, like you put it on and she flips on.
Okay, good. So if we start working as a team, it's possible that we could specialize in things that we do and actually be more productive together, right? So now I patty the burgers, she's toasting the buns, whatever. So we specialize in production. That goes way back to Adam Smith and the specialization of labor, what we saw with Tom and Jen on the island, if they specialize in what they're good at. So I add another person to the line, we figure out who's got a comparative advantage in what, and we specialize in that particular thing. It's possible that we could get it up above 200. Let me add a third person. Third person. Are we going to be going up to now, let's say we were able to get up to 220, are we going to get up to something greater than that?
No, it's going to go down because he's in the way.
Okay, now we might start elbowing. And maybe we don't start elbowing. Maybe that's a big enough grill that 3 of us, even more specialization. Another person patties, bun. Now we can specialize the labor again. How about a 4th person? How about a 5th person? How about a 6th person? How about a 7th person? Hey, what are you doing this weekend? Oh, I'm going out. We're going to see it. Start jibber-jabbering, bouncing up. How about an 8th person? How about a 9th person? Eventually, the productivity of an additional person starts to decrease. The law of diminishing marginal product, which is also called the law of diminishing returns. So that is the concept that gives us the shape of C. Now, I want to be a little bit more careful to fully incorporate what we said, though. So let's draw a new one where we've got labor and hamburgers. In other words, it's possible to be a combination of A, B, and C, but they have to be in the right sequence. At 1 person, 2 person, 3 person, 4 person, maybe early on in the production process, we are able to get increasing returns, but eventually we get a total product curve. So this is total product, TP. The total product of labor curve that looks like this. And at this inflection point, we have a special thing going on. We had increasing returns to additional units of labor early on, maybe, but eventually we have diminishing returns. And so at this inflection point, we have diminishing returns. possibly before we have increasing returns. Not necessarily, but in theory, it kind of makes sense that that's a possibility anyway. So that's what the total product curve looks like. And this might start to look familiar to you, that if we think about the, let's see, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me go ahead and add a fifth labor on. So 2 people can kick out 1,000 hamburgers. 3 people can kick out 1,500. 4 people can kick out 1,800. The marginal product of the 4th person is how much? 300. The 4th person helped us add 300 units to the production process. One thing that's a little slippery, though, to think about is that it's not necessarily specifically that person that added the 300, because it was still the team of us making hamburgers. It's just that our overall productivity started to fall because of the law of diminishing marginal product. And so this graph might look a little familiar, like marginal utility and total utility, right? So this little box here is marginal product. The marginal product of labor. And so putting our equation goggles on, the marginal product of labor is equal to the change in total product. And then I'm going to put Q here, just because I think that's a little more general, but then let's put total product in parentheses. Use those two things interchangeably. Change in hamburgers from a change in labor. All of this, bear in mind, is an engineering concept. No dollars. We haven't talked about the price of labor, the price of capital. This is all a blueprint that some engineer has figured out how these resources turn themselves into hamburgers. All right, so here is the law. Law of diminishing marginal product. And you might also, you can also call that returns. Law of diminishing marginal product, or the law of diminishing returns. As you add more and more of a variable resource. Did I give you guys this already? I'm having deja vu.
No.
Okay. As you add more and more of a variable resource, like labor, or cooks, for our example, as you add more and more of a variable resource like labor or cooks to our production line, the amount of output, hamburgers for our example, the amount of output produced by each additional cook eventually diminishes. Sorry, I got a little low here, guys. As you add more and more of a variable resource, like labor, the amount of output, hamburgers, produced by each additional cook eventually diminishes as long as one resource is fixed. I'll add that back up here. because that's an important feature to this, or kind of a key feature. So I'm still adding on to that, as long as at least one other resource, like the Capitol Grill, which I think is the name of a real restaurant, like the grill top, as long as at least one other resource is fixed. Long definition, probably one of the top 3 econ concepts of all time. So highlight, memorize, important, the law of diminishing marginal product. Okay, so let's get some numbers going. That kind of flow with the example I just took you through. We're going to make about 6 columns worth of data, so we're going to put our schedule goggles on. And our first column is going to be labor, our cooks. And we're going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cooks. And then we're going to look at hamburger production, the quantity of hamburgers. And hamburgers with 0 people, you get 0 hamburgers. 1 worker, you get 100 hamburgers. 2 workers, you get 220. 3 workers, let's say you get 320. 4 workers, 400. And 5, 460. Next column I want to look at is the marginal product of labor. That is the change in hamburgers I get from each additional person. We were doing this already. So it's kind of undefined, doesn't make sense at 0. The first unit of labor gave me how many hamburgers?
100.
100. The second unit of labor gave me
120.
120. And then we got 100,
60.
60,
It's 80,
that
80,
one's
60.
80. And then the last one's 60. Now, what we didn't talk about was the average product of labor. The average product of labor. So, let's say that we're down here producing 400 hamburgers. What is the average product for every person?
100.
How much on average? 100, right? So we got 4 workers, we're making 100 or 400 hamburgers. On average, each one is making 100. So the average product of labor with our formula is Q divided by L. No triangle. Q divided by L. And if we work down the list here, undefined at 0, 1 person, average is 100. 120 with 2. Oh, 110, sorry. We got 220 divided by 2 is 110. 320 divided by 3 is 106.67. We already did number 4, and then finally 5 is 92. Now, the one thing I wanted to point out was the mistake that a lot of managers make by looking at the averages, because they didn't listen in Econ 101 class, in Econ Principles. They will often say, you know what, we need 100 more hamburgers. Right now, we've got 4 people and we're making 400, so we'll get an extra 100 if we hire somebody else. Right? They're using the average production rather than thinking at the margin. Then they're going to say, whoops, we screwed up, because when we do hire the 5th person, we end up adding 60 to the production process, because the marginal product is different than the average. We can't expect the average to be the same if we're adding somebody on. And so that's why economists make efficient decisions at the margin. All of our stuff marginal utility, marginal this, marginal cost, marginal benefit, marginal, 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 marginal. We're going to keep pounding that theme all the way through. And that's why. Because for decision making, if you're thinking about hiring another person, the relevant number is the productivity of the extra person, not the average productivity of what 4 people were doing. Okay, so if the wage rate, we're going to add a little dollars onto this now. Suppose that the wage is equal to $10 per hour for a 10-hour shift. So we're kind of thinking about this production of hamburgers on a 10-hour shift type of deal. And so the next column we're going to look at is the total cost of labor. If I hire 0 people, I don't have any cost of labor. 1 person runs me $100 now. Again, $10 an hour, a 10-hour shift, $100. 2 people are going to run me 200, 3 people 300, 4 people 400, 5 people $500. So what we're thinking about here is our labor bill, the total cost of labor. Variable cost or fixed cost? Variable, right? So it's varying depending with that. We've also got some fixed costs. Now, fixed costs we have even if we don't produce anything. Let's just say they're $100. And this was just an assumption I'm making here. So we're assuming total fixed costs equal $100 is another assumption. If I make 100 hamburgers, how much is my fixed cost? 100, 100, 100, 100, and 100. So as we look down the list, my total fixed costs don't change. If labor is my only variable cost and everything else was fixed, we'd have total cost equal to the sum of these, right? Total fixed cost plus the variable costs give me 100. 100 plus 100 is 200. 200 plus 100 is 300. 4, 5, 6. Okay. Now, one last thing before we wrap up. What is the marginal cost? Look at your definition of marginal cost. What is my cost? How is it changing at the margin? Each time it's changing by 100. So marginal costs are increasing or constant?
Constant.
Constant. But they're not. Because this is dependent upon quantity. That's where we'll pick up next time. But I wanted to leave that thought with you. And we'll derive the rest of it on Monday. So you've got some homework due, remember, for Sunday.